Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bread, where we discuss the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashat is the third Parashat of the book of Devarim, called Ekev, which means if. It also means because. And it is the third Parashat of the book of Devarim, also called Deuteronomy, and which is the fifth book of the Parashat. My message for this year, 2010-11, is called If and Because. And in this year's message to this week's Parashat, I'm going to focus on the concept of if and because and what they have to do with this Parashat. We find this word Ekev ultimately used many times in this Parashat, but it's used all throughout the Bible. And we're going to look at real quick at the mechanics of it and get an idea of why the word itself and the mechanics of it are essential to our understanding of how we obey God and how we understand the Bible. The process, we'll start off with the process of life. Each time I do a message, what I generally do as far as the structure that I put them together with is I take a look and I go through the entire Parashat and I summarize it into bullet points. I summarize all key concepts and thoughts as I go through, and then I look at, that gets you off the page so that you can see the mechanics of and the basics of what's kind of happening in this week's Parashat. And then you can start trying to make connections and see how can those things be connected. So in this week's Parashat, looking at this concept of if and because, which even though it's the same Hebrew word, it's translated both different ways, and they have different mechanics in what they do. And so we look at those and how it relates to I basically divided up this week's Parashat's main points into each one of these two categories. And then we'll see how it relates to us, how it relates to our Torah study, and what the key concept of this Parashat is. So to get this started, we'll start and look at processes, the process of life. This goes down to this core understanding of how we work, and then we apply that into this week's Parashat. I think it helps us by understanding this. We work by observing, attaching meaning, and then learning. This is how we start when we're babies. We come out observing things, sounds, sights, whatever observation through our senses we make. And then we eventually start to attach meaning to them. That comes a little bit later. And when we start to attach meaning, then we can really start learning. And what happens is with a lot of people as they're studying the Torah, the same thing goes. Torah study is like the observation stage. Then we have to decide, well, what does that mean now that I've studied that? That's where a lot of people run into trouble, is because we can attach right meanings and wrong meanings and partially right meanings to it. It isn't a right or wrong situation. And then you have to take into account our awareness. So based on the knowledge that you have, say limited knowledge, you may read something and feel that's right, and that's the truth. But had you expanded your knowledge and learned more and got more information, you come to find out that actually isn't right, but you didn't have that additional information to make a better decision. And we can see this in our lives. A lot of times we look back when we were younger. We look back when we had different religious beliefs. We can see that there's things in our lives that we believed at one point in our lives that we absolutely don't believe anymore. And at the time, we really thought. It could be something as simple as making bad choices, how we made choices. Like, there's things that you might have done as a kid that looking back, you go, man, I can't believe I survived that. What a dumb thing that was that I did. And you would never make that choice now. But at one point, you justified that choice and thought that was a great choice, and you did it. But your awareness wasn't, and your experience wasn't great enough to realize what a bad choice it was. This is why most 15-year-old boys and girls, they get this know-it-all attitude, and they don't know it all, but they think they do. And so they're zealous when they lack experience and wisdom, and that zealousness is dangerous. They make rash decisions. Oh, I'm going to move in with my boyfriend, or I'm going to drop out of school, or all these different things that aren't really a good choice. And I'm sure that as they grow older, they'll figure out that wasn't a good choice. But in the moment, they were very zealous about it. And if you've been following my messages, you know that I think zealousness in religion is probably to be preserved, or I should say reserved. It's just not necessary. Most people come in, they know about 0.3% of anything, and they go out there zealous, ready to have arguments with everybody about how God works and what's right and what's truth and what isn't. You've got the truth of the universe contained in the Bible and in many layers that people have spent their entire life trying to extrapolate just a tiny portion of. And then you get people who come in and they read 2 or 3 sentences, or they've been doing it a year, or blah, blah, blah. And they think they've got the universe and truth figured out. And then they start going and telling everybody else how they're wrong. And I think there's no room for that. There's no place for it. There's no need for it. And it's almost always foolishness in it. And it leads to trouble. So when we look at this concept of observing, these 3 steps that we go through as babies and as human beings, and we're always going through them: observing, attaching meaning, and then learning. See, a lot of people don't study their Torah at all, so they're not really observing much. Their knowledge is very limited. Then the less information you have from study, the problem is the more likelihood there is that you'll attach the wrong meaning to it, and the more wrong meanings you attach, then when you go to study, they skew how you see the text, which only causes you to see a more and more distorted picture. And this is why millions of people use the Bible in all types of thousands and thousands of different denominations, and they all think something different about the same book, because they've attached the wrong meanings, and then the little observing that they do is then tainted, and they attach more distorted meanings, and everybody gets different things. But see, just realizing this and understanding this can help save a lot of people going into it, knowing that this is what can happen in the way that they study, in being a little more careful and looking at both sides of arguments when they're talking to other people, in techniques like that I use, which is like trying to prove the other person right instead of just wrong. You can prove them right and prove them wrong. You'll learn a lot more by trying to prove them right, because there's certain things that even if I wanted it to be true, I can't find the proof for it to be true, or it seems to violate these things. I'm going to be a more just judge if I'm trying to make it seem right, seeing where they're coming from, than if I'm just trying to disprove it. Then I may not get a good grasp of where they're coming from. And so I end up just arguing from a point, a closed point of ignorance on my point, saying, well, I'm just trying to pick it apart. Well, you need to try and build it up first and see why, because then you start to understand the mechanics of it and why they think it works. And when you understand it better, you also probably have a better understanding when you have that information coupled with your criticism of it, to be able to find out exactly where it really doesn't work and what the key points are. It happens all the time. People on Facebook or in chat rooms, they're arguing. It could be a Jew and a Christian, or a Messianic and a Jew, or a Messianic and a Christian, or 2 Christians, or whatever it is. And what happens is, I listen to a lot of the arguments, and I'm thinking, these guys are both wrong. But see, one is just arguing one wrong point against another person who's arguing another wrong point, and neither of them are really listening to each other, and so it's a total waste of time. So it's important that we understand the power of attaching meaning to things, and understand that when we study the Scriptures, just because we can attach a meaning to it, just because it looks like that's what it's saying, doesn't make that true. So there's no need for zealousness to run around and think you've got it figured out. You probably don't. It's all relative to how long you've been studying and what you've been exposed to, because you might be exposed to some more information and a deeper understanding and other things that will change the way you feel about them. And you can't undo your zealousness that you did. Because you come in, you're zealous, you think you know the right answer, and then you go pound other people over the head with it. Now you go back later 2 years and find out, oh, I wasn't quite right about that. You adjust yourself, but you can't go unadjust all those other people who've gone out and pounded other people with what is now apparently a lie. And I was listening to a podcast earlier, and it's a guy who I generally don't agree with. But again, I listen. I don't, create character assassination, say, well, gosh, because I don't agree, I'm going to purposely disagree with everything he does. No, we have to weigh every word. And if it's right, then you say, okay, I agree with that. And then the next thing's wrong, you say, but I don't agree with that. And this is how you have this is how you become a good listener. So there was things he said. It was about prophecy. And one of his points was that people get so caught up in what's happening in the Middle East and the government conspiracies, and they miss the point that whether or not they're obeying God's commandments is more relevant to them than understanding all that. And I have said that for a long time. I agree with that statement, absolutely. If you're lying, if you're not keeping your word, if you're still breaking a lot of the commandments, which most people don't think they are because they're just not studying enough to realize how many things they're not doing right, then you're walking around and you're thinking, you're focused on the wrong things. So I agree with him on that. But one of the things that he said is, he says, if you don't like me, he says, many people don't like me. He says, but if you don't like me, you don't like Yah. And I had to disagree with that. And he said, if you disagree, basically his concept is, if you disagree with what he's saying, then you just disagree with the Word of God. But that would only work if the only things you said were the Word of God. And even the Word of God was used by Satan to test and to tempt Mashiach, but he was wrongly applying the quotes that he was using, even though he might have been quoting them correctly. So it goes deeper than just saying the Word of God, and then anything else that he would be adding to it that wasn't direct quote would not be the Word of God. And when he went on and talked about, he was a watchman and all this and that, and one of the prayers he said before the meeting, and I've heard it from a lot of other preachers and pastors, was, I don't want to speak my words. I only want to speak your words. And let whatever I say just be your words. Well, the big problem with that is that you're essentially saying then that all of your words are God's words. And that's a dangerous place to be, because they're not going to be. They're your words, no matter how much you believe them or not. And at that point, you'd be bearing false witness. You'd also be taking his name or his authority in vain by saying God said this, and you'd become a false prophet who speaks words of God that aren't really the Word of God. So every time people say, well, this is the truth, and I know the truth, and other people don't know the truth, and I'm just telling you the truth is the Word of God. So I don't think they really quite get what they're saying. They're saying that they're speaking for God, and when you do that, if you're in any way wrong, which you are, there's a great penalty to what you're doing. And I think it's just absolutely foolish to say that, and it comes from pride, not humility. I think you'd be better off saying, this is what I really believe to be true. See, that doesn't have all the clout. That doesn't have the, look, I'm speaking the Word of God. Saying that is just foolish, in my opinion. I think we don't understand the whole universe. We don't understand. To know the truth about one speck of dust in the universe, you have to know the truth about everything. Because that's how you know how it relates to everything else, to really know what that speck of dust was. So the fact is that, you either are like Mashiach and you know the truth, absolute truth, or you don't. You have an idea about the truth. And most people aren't humble enough to say, this is what I live by, this is what I understand, this is what my studies say. This is what I believe to be the truth. But when you start to put your authority stamp and God's authority stamp on saying this is the truth, you're going to be found a liar. It's just how it's going to be. And for all the people who hear teachers saying this or people saying this, you should probably, suggest that they don't say these things, because it's bad for them. I feel sorry for them when, just like the Parashat or the story of Job, when the people who thought they were being zealous and speaking God's words, they ended up that they got in trouble with God because God said they didn't speak quite right about him. So they thought they were just laying it down how it was, but ended up Job had to offer some sacrifices for them because they were in trouble. And I see this all the time. So it's just an important thing that it is attaching a meaning to them. Just because you believe it's true doesn't make it truth, even if everywhere you look it seems to work. Don't get caught in your own delusion that you've figured out the truth. Just study, walk humbly with God, and live by what you believe to be the truth, willing to change it at any time that somebody shows you something that is more true than what you're currently living, because that means that you're willing to give up the lie when you find out it's a lie. Many people, like the Pharisees of Mashiach's time, they weren't willing to give up their old lies that they spent so much time learning, because they fell in love with their own delusion, instead of caring enough about the truth to say, oh gosh, looks like that isn't working out very well. We better abandon that ship and get on with the real truth. So we'll get back to this week's parashat. The process of life is about observing, which most people fail to do because they're lazy, they don't study, then attaching the meanings. This is where you can also go astray, and then learning. And this process brings us through life, and we keep repeating this process. If you're not doing all of those actively, it's going to be really hard for you to grow spiritually. And all those require humility. Once you add pride to the equation, the whole thing isn't worth anything. So stay humble. So now we get to this week's parashat message, which is called If and Because. If and because are the two main mechanics that we see in this week's parashat. If is what I call connections and projections. In other words, it's if you will obey the commandments and keep them, then you shall be blessed. So you got two items. The keeping of the commandments, that's the if section. The then, what's the result? Blessings. And it's making a connection between those two on a linear timeline so that you see that one causes the other. There's a causation there. And that's why the if, before you see the causation of the action, becomes like a prophet. It warns you of what this action is going to do, good or bad, whether it's going to bring you a blessing or it's going to bring you a cursing. It can see to the future. It knows the causation that this event is going to happen. So when God says, if you keep my commandments and hearken and do them, then the causation, the result is going to be blessings. And when God says it, you can absolutely count it as truth. This is this concept of Ekev, if. Now, we see if is bypassed many times in religions because they want the blessings, right? Oh, we're the children of God. We're going to enter into the kingdom. We're going to do all this. And then a lot of bad theologies out there right now want to do away with the if. Oh, don't try and earn your salvation. Righteousness doesn't count. Obedience isn't the focus. Grace and mercy and salvation is. And they got all these things to cloud away from any sense of if. The responsibility that there's anything that causes this great thing, that you're going to get all these blessings, God's going to just love you and blah, blah, blah. I don't know which book they're reading, honestly, because when I read the whole book cover to cover, I pretty much got the clue that it was basically summed out to one word, obey. That here was a book about people who obeyed God and people who didn't obey God, and what happened to them if they obeyed, what happened to them if they didn't obey. And it didn't matter if they were strangers, pagans, those who obeyed God, like we see in Isaiah 56, they were accepted and blessed. And it didn't matter if you were a child of God, or a son of Abraham, or one of the promised ones who saw his miracles that he brought out of Mitzrayim. When you disobeyed, he killed you. He plagued you. He would do away with you. So it all came down to the same thing. It didn't matter who you were. It mattered ultimately. The foundation point was obedience. And so when you see this concept, you get in this week's parashat this if concept. It's been a forgotten concept, Ekev, which means there's a cause and effect by what we do and how God responds to it. And if you'll see, he does that all with his people all the way through the Bible. So it says, if you serve him, then he'll provide the rain. That's part of this week's parashat. If you keep all of his commandments, then he'll bring you to the promised land. So we see this causation. So that's the if side. If is like a prophet. It's a warning. When we study the Torah, we're getting a big if, the Ekev. We're getting the warning, that we're getting the prophet telling us what's going to happen by reading story about Moshe, and when he was doing good and God was, blessing him and protecting him from the people Israel who wanted to kill him, and from Paro who wanted to kill him, all these things. So let's see, he was obeying. When he disobeyed and he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, then God said, you're not going to go into the promised land. You're going to go up and die up here in the mountain. So we see this concept, this if concept, that this Torah, these stories are like little prophets. They're parables. The whole book is essentially a parable that teaches us, lets us watch other people's lives and see what happened to them when they made a choice to obey God or a choice not to, and so that we can learn from them. And that's, again, the problem. Some people read those stories and they're not getting it. They're not attaching the meaning that instead of going in and looking at Passover, they might go, oh, look, God saved his people. Well, that's one meaning you could attach to that. Or you could attach another meaning that said, God told everybody to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood on their doorpost. And even though there was no law yet, he commanded them something to do. And the people who lived were the ones who obeyed. And the people who didn't, where the death angel went in, were people who disobeyed. And it didn't matter if they were Egyptians or Mitzrayim or if they were Israelis. So it wasn't a respecter of persons. Obey and live, or disobey and die. Well, that's another meaning you could get from that story of Passover. So we observe, and depending on the meaning that you put will depend on what you get out of it. So we look to this next concept, which is the because. Now, first we had the prophet who's giving us the warning, gives us a chance. Before it happens, before the blessing happens, we can know that God will bless us and trust us if we do the right things. Before the cursing happens, if we disobey, we know that we can trust that the prophet, the word of God, said, you will be punished if you disobey. So we get in that, the smart ones take the first warning. That's wisdom. When you learn something before it actually, you make the choice by learning from others. Now for the second people who weren't so smart, they get the because. Ekev also means because. Now this is where God or his prophets tell you after he delves out judgment. Okay, because you would not hear and obey, now, you will not go into the promised land. Because you would not keep my commandments, now, the nations will come and scatter you or take you away into captivity. Because you were faithful in not withholding your son, Avraham, I will bless you, I'll make you a great nation. So the because happens after, but a lot of times there's going to either be a blessing or a cursing already handed out by the time you get to because. So if you listen when it says if, you're going to do a lot better than if you wait till you hear the because. And so now, because not only verifies whether you get a blessing or a cursing, it verifies that God's Ekev, his if, was true. He warned you. You got to see from other people who disobeyed him what happened to him. And so now when you get the punishment that they got, when you're an example of what not to do in the next Bible for people to read, then it's a because. Because this person did this, this is what happened to him. It's now too late. And so for some people, they learn from the because stage, and maybe that's the last step. Sometimes there's a because. Sometimes you did get punished, like the children of Israel came through, and they got punished. They're not going to go into the promised land, but their children are. But they're going to know why they're dying in the wilderness, because you didn't believe me. This is why, So each time you'll see another pattern in the scriptures where God comes back when he's delving out your punishment. He warned you. You didn't listen to the prophet, and then when the judgment comes, he's going to make sure that you understand this is why it's happening to you. Now, at the same time, we get this concept of, like it talks in this week's Parashat, of because you have seen all these things. So now he's talking about the people, that they should keep these commandments and all this, because what they've seen these miracles and these wonders, they've experienced it firsthand. And because of that, again, it should produce something. He's expecting you to learn. So at the because stage, you have another chance to learn. Your first chance is with the if, the smart ones, the wise ones, the ones who don't procrastinate, the ones who don't wait till the last minute, who learn before it comes on their doorstep. They learn ahead in advance. They study their Torah. And that's where we're at now, so they can do the right things now, before Mashiach returns. And see, those guys are the ones who are preparing in advance. Other people are going to get the because. Now, the because is still a chance to learn if you attach the right meaning. But how many people did things happen and God's doing it to them? There's verses in the scriptures about the fact that the people don't get, just like the children of Israel going to Pharaoh, and basically didn't realize he was the one saying that they had to gather their own straw. And they're like, hey, I can't believe this, that some people are telling us that we have to gather our own straw. And they thought Paro was for them, didn't realize he wasn't for them, and he was the one who was actually bringing the punishment. And there's many spots in the Bible, in the Torah, where God says the same thing about his own people, that they don't understand that it's God who's bringing the punishment on them. So I know there's a lot of people who might say, oh, they blame everything on Satan. Like, oh, I'm going to, rebuke this sickness, it's of Satan, or this bad thing that's happening to me. And they don't understand that they may be punished for their own misdeeds. It may be God that's punishing them. And that's attaching the wrong meaning. So if they think that they're still righteous and they're not attaching the right meaning to something, then they may be delusional and it's not working for them. And in the same way, we got to be very careful in how we attach meanings. So this concept of this because gives you another chance. It's saying, look, now you've gotten punished. Israel got punished many times with the rod of correction. But hopefully they learn from it and they go, oh, we shouldn't have been complaining about the meat. Now let's shut our mouth about water. Or hey, we shouldn't have been, we shouldn't have made the golden calf. Now let's not go in the land and commit idolatry. But they're not learning from their own mistakes, and they're not learning from the mistakes of their fathers sometimes. So this is all that defines Torah. Torah is learning from the mistakes of the past. And we have to apply that to ourselves. Most people don't assume that they're the ones that are the bad guys of the Bible. Oh yeah, Satan. Oh, the adversary, the nations. Well, I can tell you one thing. Satan can accuse you of more things. He doesn't need to make stuff up. We've all been wicked and liars and done wickedness all throughout our lives, that he could just sit there rambling off all the stuff that we're guilty of, and we can't blame one bit of it on Satan. He didn't force us to do anything. We got to make the choice, and we chose wickedness. So everybody wants to blame Satan and rebuke Satan and do all this and that, and it's like, rebuke yourself, blame yourself. You've done a lot of wickedness, and you don't have anyone to blame for it. So just focus on yourself and try and get yourself corrected. So we have if and because. Now, this is the mechanics that we learn, and these are powerful things we have to use in order to understand. We have to learn to listen the first time, study our Torah and listen, and in the end, we have to learn from both the Torah, the becauses, and learn from our own mistakes that we've made. And that's how we grow and become more and more righteous, and more like Mashiach. Now, there's two concepts in this week's Parashat. What I call with the if and the because. I said they're connections. They're all connections, making the right connections, which is the mechanics of how we attach meaning. It's attaching the right things together. And this goes for when you do your Torah study. It's being able to observe the right things, put the right meanings to them, and connect them correctly with the other things in the Torah to be able to learn. So, with the if, we see the projections. In this week's Parashat, we can see that most of the main things in this Parashat are either projections about things that are going to happen, warnings, or the reflections over things that Israel went through. On the projection side, we see keeping the commandments for blessing, right? If you keep the commandments, you'll be blessed. These are projections. They're telling you, do this, and this is what's going to be. I'm prophesying, this is what will come to you. To not fear and learn from the other nations, right? Look at what they did in the past. They're getting kicked out. Don't be like them. Don't fear them, because even though you're afraid here, but you can't see the end of what's going to happen, which is if you obey me, I'm going to fight for you, and I'll overcome those nations, and they won't be able to harm you. After the blessings, they're going to forget YHWH. So again, here they are in the present time thinking, hey, we're great, we're awesome, or saying, hey, God, help us, and then God helps them, and they turn around and start being rebellious. Just like when they were up against the sea, and they needed God to help them, who came in and fought Paro and brought the water down on them, and they were like, yay, yay, and then a little while later, they're complaining that God's trying to kill them, and they're not trusting in him anymore. So this is a pattern to say, watch yourself, because you're going to do this. Whether I do good or bad to you, you're going to turn the other way. You're going to, if I bless you, you're going to turn back into idolatry and get complacent. If you're asking for help, then I'm going to give you the help, and then you'll forget about me. And so we see that these are projections and warnings that we can learn from. And then reflections. Reflections are that he brought them through the wilderness to humble them with many tests to see if they would obey his and keep him and keep his commandments. It's funny that the whole wilderness, the whole journey of God from bringing you out of Mitzrayim, which models the world, and going and getting the law and all that was a test both to humble you and see if you'd obey. So just like having Abraham go offer his son as a sacrifice, it was a test to see if Abraham would obey him. It was a ridiculous test in the scope of things, to kill your only son after, you had no son, you had no inheritance. Now I give you one so you can be happy. You're not going to die and leave nothing behind. But then I want you to go kill him. That's craziness. But he knew it didn't matter what was said. He obeyed. And that was counted to him for righteousness. And the same pattern is when we see with Israel, when he told them, go up to the mountain. And they didn't want to obey and go up to the mountain. And, we're going to get killed, blah, blah, blah. They didn't trust God. Then they get punished. They're told they're not going to go in the promised land. So now, all of a sudden, they're willing to do it. But then the second test came, which is, are they doing it because they've changed and decided they want to obey me? Or are they doing it because they want to go into the promised land? Or are they doing it because they want to avoid the punishment that I'm bringing to them? See, the top one of all of these is to obey. And as Shaul says, as it says about Shaul, Saul, it is better, as the prophet told him, it is better to obey than to sacrifice. So he was going to offer all these animals that he took as spoils of war when they were supposed to destroy them all. And it teaches us a powerful lesson that obedience is better than sacrifice, even if you're offering a sacrifice up to God. Just obey first. It's the same way with Mashiach. Mashiach, and I'm not going to divert into that too much, but is a sacrifice. But obedience is greater than sacrifice, because Mashiach didn't need a sacrifice for himself, like the high priest normally has to do a sacrifice for themselves to cleanse their sin. And then they can offer other people a sacrifice. But Mashiach didn't need to sacrifice himself because he had obedience in place of sacrifice. And that is the greatest, the highest level. It isn't to diminish the value of Mashiach's sacrifice. It's actually to say it would have been greater had our Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim, not had to die for us because we all obeyed and were like him. That would have been the highest level. So when we see this, going back to the projections and reflections, the whole point of bringing them through the wilderness, when he says, go up, then he says, don't go up. Well, he just told them to go up. So it really wasn't about whether they went up or not. It was about whether they would obey. And they went up instead, which was still disobedience. And they were destroyed. So we get this concept. Again, don't ever let anybody talk you out of the Bible's about obedience. All kinds of people have different theories and all kinds of stuff. It's about salvation or grace or blessings or who knows what, being a Jew or and something. There's all kinds of things. I can tell you what the whole book is about: obeying God. Everybody, that's the one thing that everything from start to finish has in common. And it is the continuous value maker. It is the currency of the Bible is obedience. For everybody, for random pagan nations, all the way to the chosen people who walked and talked with God. That was always the currency with God. So don't let anyone talk you out of that. So we look at reflections. So he used this wilderness to humble them to see if they would obey or not, ultimately. That's why he did all of these things. Just as it says, here's the whole matter. The whole matter of the Bible. To fear YHWH and keep his commandments. That's what it says. That's the whole duty of man, it says. It doesn't just say the Bible. The whole duty of man. That's why we're here. So, in looking at these reflections, next is that it was not for your righteousness that you go in. So again, this goes to attaching meaning. Don't think going in that you're awesome and that's why you're going in. And again, this is to say, stay humble. Don't get proud. And I see this with a lot of Torah teachers and all this and that they're I got lots of opinions. If someone wants to ask me about it. But I don't walk around saying that it's the truth or that this is how it is in the Word of God or, you should listen to me because I know it and everybody else is a liar but me. That's just not the approach you can take. You can say, this is what I study, this is what I believe to be true, this is what I'm going to live by, but my mind, my ears are open to alleviate what's wrong with them and to fine-tune them, and I'll do that my whole life. And I'll let Mashiach tell me if I have anything right. Anyway, next we go to the golden calf. Here's more reflections. Here was their sin, that they were supposed to reflect on their sin. They weren't supposed to get prideful that it was they were so righteous. That's why they've got to go on this long journey. They've been rebellious since the day he knew them. You know, I love that one. And that Moshe has interceded for Israel. He's constantly falling down and praying to preserve them because they don't deserve it. So this shouldn't make you feel like it says don't be proud, but at the same time it isn't don't be lazy. Look, there's nothing I can do. All I've ever done was wrong, so why try? Don't be trying to be righteous. No, it's more the other way around. If what you've done was wrong, have some responsibility and start doing what's right and make up for all those years. Now that you understand the difference between right and wrong, make up for those times that you were unrighteous by being righteous. It's actually literally the least you could do. Whether it changes any kind of judgment on you or not doesn't matter, but it's the right thing to do to make up for all of your poor actions. So anyway, we get to the last few points in this week's Parashat, which are a combination of both reflection and projection. And those are that the nations before you. You see, you can look back at them, you can learn from them, you can also be warned by them, looking forward in what you'll do when it's your turn to go in. Everybody reads the Bible and they, oh, I can't believe they were complaining in the wilderness, blah, I would, never do that. And I doubt that. They probably will do that, We give ourselves too much credit. Again, we've been rebellious since the day he knew us. And so it's better to assume, oh yeah, I'm probably going to complain about things too that I shouldn't. I just pray that I can catch myself. I'm going to do my best to catch myself, but I'm probably going to be one of those sinners. And that's a humble attitude when you go into it instead of giving yourself so much credit. I personally think the reason why we have a Bible written the way it is, instead of God just speaking to us every time we did something wrong, was because we wouldn't believe God. Because if we read about these guys, we go, oh, how dumb, they were complaining. They should have just shut up and received patiently the provision that God gives for them. And yet we then turn around and don't trust God's going to provide for us and start freaking out. So, it's easy for us to judge other people, and we don't apply the same judgment. We're an unjust judge when it comes to ourselves. So I tend to try and give myself less credit, and you'll probably be more safe, higher percentage of the time than if you always give yourself the credit that you don't deserve. And the second point was the second law. The second law, giving of the law, was great because not only did it say, look back at the past, at how much you broke this past law, but we're going to give you a second chance. And it looks forward to a projection of Mashiach, where Moshe and the written law are the first law, and the ones that come second is Mashiach. It's a foreshadowing that Mashiach will come as the spirit of the law. So it's a beautiful story there. And we end this week's Parashat with the requirements. The requirements, it says, fear him, walk in his ways, keep his commandments. And then it says, teach your children so that you and they may live. That's the end. That's the whole duty of man. It started in the same, and we're just going through life observing, which is study the Torah, work on attaching the right meanings, know that you probably have a lot of wrong meanings, keep judging them, be harsher of a judge on your own theories than you are of other people's, try and accept theirs. The truth is durable. It will find its way out. If you try and accept something that you hear someone else say that isn't right, and you try and prove it right, if it isn't right, you're going to run into problems. And that makes you a smarter scholar, because it also gives you a point of view that you're trying to prove it right but can't. And that will teach you how to do the same thing with your own theories when you realize, I believe my theory, but have I really evaluated it, to where it's not right. So my theories, I'm going to try and disprove. Other people's theories, I'm going to try and prove right. And out of that, I'm going to grow in wisdom and be able to refine and attach better meanings so I can learn more correctly. And don't be so darn zealous over what you think you know and over other people and where they are, because we're all moving along a different line. And if you know everything now and you're not going to grow, then just like a plant in the garden of YHWH, you're one that's withering and dying, and those plants are plucked out. We're supposed to be responsible to grow all the way through and make the right choices and grow and learn. So anyway, that is my message for this week's Parashat. If and because we see the powerful concept of the warnings to learn in advance and be wise, and also to learn from the mistakes that others have made and that we make. Till next time, I'm going to say strive for righteousness and Shalom.